Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is well. I think we're going to get started now because we've got quite a lot of content to cover in a fairly short time, so I don't want us to run over too much. But thank you all for joining us for today's Virtual Advice AM. Today's session is focusing on digital advertising and social media. And I am joined today by my colleagues, Dave and Joe. Dave works in our copy advisor team and Joe works in our compliance team. I'm sure many of you probably know who I am, but for those that don't, I'm Rumney. I work in the comms team here at the ASA and I look after all of our training events that we run. Before I hand over to Joe, who's going to take you through the first section of today's training, I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping bits about how the session's going to work and just take you through the aims and the learning outcomes as well. So to give you a bit of a rundown on what we'll be covering and what the aims are of today's session. So the aim of today's training is to improve your knowledge on the ASA's digital remit, including the rules and codes that apply to social media. So by the end of today's session, you'll feel confident in identifying what is included in the ASA's digital remit, including social media and advertorials. You'll feel confident in demonstrating how advertisers can make ads clear and identifiable as such. So we'll look closely at disclosure. You'll feel confident in explaining how ads should be labeled and the types of labels that are accepted by the ASA. And you'll also feel confident in describing the issues that need to be considered with targeting and placement. Now, this is just a brief rundown of what we'll be covering. So we'll be looking at exactly what's covered by the code in terms of our digital remit. We'll look at recognition of ads. So this is how to make ads identifiable as ads. We'll then look at labeling and we'll finish things off by looking at targeting and placement. So you will have the opportunity to ask Joe and Dave any questions that you have. There is time for Q&A at the end of each of these sections. And the best way to ask your questions is to pop them into the Q&A box that you have there at the top. I'll then be monitoring them as they come through and we'll do our very best to answer as many of the questions as we can during the Q&A sections. At the end of today's session, I'll also be giving you more information about where you can find further guidance and advice from us. And you will receive a copy of the slides at the end alongside a copy of the recording as well, should you wish to watch back. That's it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Joe, who's going to be taking you through the first part of today's training.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Rumney. Morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction as well. For those of you who haven't taken part in any of the previous presentations, just a quick note to explain the role of the ASA and CAP, which is a sister organisation. David and I both work on the CAP side and we're more advertiser facing, and at the CAP we write the advertising codes and advise on how these should be interpreted, whereas the ASA is a bit more public facing and they administer and enforce the rules, responding to any complaints they happen to receive. So first off, we're going to look at what is included in the ASA's digital remit and what's covered by the rules. And just a bit of a background to the history of our digital remit. So prior to 2011, we already regulated internet ads in paid for space, but we recognised there was a bit of a gap. So for instance, a company could have a claim banned in a poster, but they still be able to make it on their own website. So obviously a bit of a disparity there. So as of March 2011, we extended our remit to fill the gap. So now, as well as online paid for space, we also regulate marketers' own websites and non-paid for space online under their control. And I'll break down the specifics of that a bit later on. So here are a few of the various types of digital media that we regulate. So banner ads, pop-ups, website content, as I've mentioned, affiliate marketing, etc. So probably the most easily to identify type of ads that we've got is the paid for advertising space. And on your screen there, hopefully you can see a few examples of paid for ads. We've got, oh, that's slightly different to what I was expecting. Oh no, there we go. Look, they're all scrolling through. So for instance, you've got a Game of Thrones there, Now TV, that's the sponsored ad on the left. And then you've got a pre-roll YouTube ad for Huawei in the middle, and then a promoted LinkedIn post there on the right-hand side. It's also worth remembering that if any online space is normally reserved for paid for ads, it still counts as paid for space, even if it's been donated. So if a charity has it for free, but it was otherwise would be paid for space, it still counts there. So basically, paid for space just refers to the place where the ad is appearing, and it's not about particularly whether the advertiser is paid for it. So thanks, Ramneek, for handling the slide so adeptly, I should say there. One type of advertising that, due to its close resemblance to editorial content, may be less readily identifiable as an ad is an advertorial. That's often referred to as advertisement features. So this material might appear, for example, as long form copy presented in a similar way to editorial content within a publication, or as an influencer marketing post. And because they're less readily identifiable as an ad, you do need to take extra care to make sure it's clear to consumers that they are seeing an ad. And David's going to go into a bit more detail about that a bit later on. So the code defines this type of ad as a feature, announcement, or promotion, and the content of which is controlled by the marketer, not the publisher, that is disseminated in exchange for payment or other reciprocal arrangement. That is the very technical way of saying that the code covers any communication in a space where there has been both payment and control by a brand. So even if they don't own the space themselves. There's a couple of examples here, and on the left you can see an ad feature, which is for the Department of Work and Pensions. They paid for that ad to be published on the Mail Online website, and the DWP had editorial control over that content still, even though it appeared in an online newspaper. Then on the right, we've got an ad for the GC. It's one of her Instagram stories. It was paid for by Skinny Jabs, so, and even though they don't own the GC social media accounts, they still had some control over the content, so it counted as being in remit for our purposes. And in this context, both the Mail Online and the GC would be classed as publishers. So I've mentioned payment and control a bit, but why is that important? Well, this basically forms a two-part test that we use to establish if something falls under our remit. The code definition talks about payment or other reciprocal arrangement. So while this can mean a direct money transfer, this could also mean the publisher being given free items or services or some other commercial benefit. Now, that could be a physical product like an item of clothing or a video game, a subscription to a service, or being paid to be a brand ambassador. Control is fairly broadly defined, and ASA rulings have established many different ways that an advertiser can exert that control. This might include dictating what the content should be or should not be, in fact, demanding final approval on that content, or, for instance, requiring some other element to be included in the content. If either of the two stages of the test, i.e. payment or control, I should say, are not met, the material might not fall into the ASA's remit as an advertorial, but it could still be considered a different type of advertising and be in our remit anyway. It's also important to remember that when an advertiser or brand gives a publisher a payment or other reciprocal arrangement to create a piece of content, that content still becomes subject to consumer protection law. So this means that even if the ASA doesn't regulate it, the material could be regulated by another, and that's probably going to be the Competition and Markets Authority, or the CMA. They're a statutory regulator and enforce all the consumer protection regulation, and that requires publishers to disclose whenever there has been a form of payment for a bit of content. I'm not going to say reciprocal arrangement again, don't worry. So we've got a little bit of a case study to look at here. This is for Brooks Brothers Limited, and in this case, The influencer was paid in exchange for promoting the brand in various ways. He was required to publish a pre-agreed number of posts and stories about the brand across all of his social media. He was required to include specific hashtags, and he was also forbidden from tagging other brands in his material. So it's effectively quite a lot of control there from the advertiser. And the ASA did indeed rule that these were all forms of editorial control. And since he was paid, then the post did fulfill the advertorial definition. And therefore the ruling was upheld because there wasn't any labelling to make it clear that it was in fact an ad. So we've looked at types of ads an advertiser might pay someone else to publish, but what about when an advertiser publishes their own content? Well, the scope of the code, and in this instance, section 1H states that the code applies to ads and other marketing communications by or from companies, organisations or sole traders on their own websites, in other non-paid for space online under their control, and they have to be directly connected with the supply, transfer of goods, services, opportunities and gifts. You can read the rest in the code. I recommend it. It's a good nighttime read. And I'm going to break down all the different components of that very long sentence later, so don't worry about that. And the really important aspect is what we call the directly connected test. It's a media neutral definition, so it could describe anything from a web page to a TikTok video. And hopefully you'll see there's an example there of a tweet by Lord Sugar. It is a normal tweet. It's not a promoted one, so it doesn't really fit the paid for space definition. It might look the same as an advertorial tweet, but in this case, a third party hasn't approached Alan Sugar and offered him payment in exchange to make the tweet. But when the ASA investigated a complaint about it, they established that Alan Sugar is in fact a director and a partner of Style Ideas Limited. So it meant he had a commercial stake in the sale of its services. And the tweet also included a link that allowed consumers to buy products from the Style Ideas website. So because of both those elements, the ASA said that it was an ad because it was directly connected to the supply of goods, and effectively there was a reciprocal arrangement because Alan would make potentially a wad of cash off the sales from that. So section 1H also refers to companies' own websites. Very obvious example here, it's the McDonald's website. It's very clear that that's their own website. The next section in that big old long sentence talks about other non-paid for space online under their control. So that could include any social media accounts that a brand or their representatives control, platforms like Facebook, YouTube and Pinterest. I'm going to go a little bit back to directly connected because a big portion of that sentence is directly connected with the supply or transfer of goods, services, opportunities and gifts. So something can be directly connected in various different ways. So as I said, with the Sugar tweet, you can buy a product directly from the website. It might be, they might be talking about a product that they actually sell, and it's all really revolved around the product, the purpose of a communication, which is to sell something or transfer something to another person. And there's a final section of that big old sentence. It might consist of direct solicitations for donations, and this is particularly relevant for ads relating to causes and ideas, which are actually exempt from being covered by the code in non-paid for space. So that might include marketing by charities that are encouraging people to support a particular cause. However, if they do also solicit a donation, that brings the content back under the remit of the code. So in this example, we can see an ad for Bernardo's, and it talks about helping to support young carers. So that's requesting money, so it's requesting a transfer, so that brings it back into the remit of the code. Let's have a little wet my whistle. Thanks, Romney. So moving on to affiliate advertising, got a few examples here. Both of these are affiliate ads because they contain affiliate links, and that means that influencers are paid in direct proportion to the number of click-throughs that their content generates. And as a result, they're kind of secondary advertisers, if you like. So on the left there, we've got Stacey Solomon. She's done an Instagram story there, and all the story relates purely to that particular product. And you can click through to the affiliate link to get the product there. And on the right, there's a blog post. It's mainly editorial content about a family holiday, but it does contain affiliate links for Matalan products under some of the pictures. So that section of the blog will also count as advertising. Sometimes publishers can get a bit confused about why the ASA considers affiliate posts to be ads, but it's because they're really thinking about the payments and control test that applies to advertorials. Affiliate advertising really comes into our remit because it fulfills a directly connected test. So, influencers gain a financial benefit from every click. The whole point of the affiliate link is to directly sell a good or a service. So that's why it's in remit for a different reason than an advertorial. Okay. So we've looked a bit at actions that could be taken by advertisers and publishers, but what about user-generated content? It's created organically. There isn't any initial editorial control by the brand. However, brands do need to be careful about any type of control they exert over that content once it's online. So if you check out this example for Skinny Tan, they reposted a story by a user on Instagram, and by doing so they actually incorporated it into their own marketing, and it therefore became subject to the code. So this young lady, Ellie Norris, used a filter on the image after she used some fake tan, and that could have misled people about the overall effectiveness of the product. And the complaint about this ad was upheld on that basis. So it's important to remember that if you do share user-generated content, you need to be confident that any images or claims don't misrepresent your own product. Obviously, Ellie, this didn't set out to create a misleading image because she just wanted to show herself wearing a nice bit of fake tan and looking lovely, but it did then become a problem for the brand because they turned it into advertising. Same principle applies to written user-generated content as well as images, of course. And we understand that customers like to comment on a brand's social media page, and that brands do want to engage with their audience. So it's important to understand at what point we would consider that sort of interaction to become advertising. So if your social media accounts are moderated to remove negative or off-brand comments, give likes to positive comments, and write quite detailed responses to users' requests to questions, or for instance, it's more likely to bring all of your content into remit because you're amending it to have that sort of positive spin to become more like advertising. But to avoid the user-generated content coming into remit, it's best to only use light moderation. So for instance, removing offensive comments is fine, and don't request comments from users either and seek out additional content. Just let them write their own natural comments. Customer relations are obviously very important, but you do still have to be mindful that when you're responding to questions publicly, a detailed response that might include a claim about your product or services could then bring that post back into remit. So it's probably most helpful to thank a customer for a question in public and direct them to a different customer service channel. Then you don't have to worry about whether or not it's advertising at all. Okay, we're going to move on to content that is less likely to be in our remit. We'd think about editorial and news media. Got some audience participation for you. If you take a look at this image, can anyone tell me which of the red boxes, and I hope you can see them all on your screen there, is in the ASA's remit and which is not? And I think Romney's got a poll for you. How's that looking, Romney?
We'll give it another 2 seconds so that people can get their answers in.
Yeah, my answer's not too sure, if that helps anyone.
Perfect. Great. Well, it looks like most people said box A.
Perfectamundo. Well, that's correct. The contents in box A is advertising. It appears in pay for space, and there is a little thing add button at the side there which tells you that. And correctly, box B is out of the ASA's remit. It's purely editorial content. It's a news story. The article doesn't contain any affiliate links either, so we know that's out of remit. I've used that, that's first example, that's probably a bit more clear cut. Let's have a look at something a bit less obvious maybe. So this is a Paddy Powers, an old example of a Paddy Power Twitter account. And we've got another question here. There's 2 red boxes again. Can anyone tell me if tweet A is likely to be in remit? And also, is tweet B likely to be in remit?
I think this one probably is going to require a bit more thinking time, Jo.
It is a fiddly one.
Give it a few more seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
There we go.
Oh, a mixed bag, and I can quite understand why. So tweet A is actually in remit. It talks about a particular race and the going on the track, and because Paddy Power do indeed offer bets on racing, that's going to bring the tweet into remit because it's all about it's related to their service, even though they're not specifically clicking through to a place where you can make a bet. It's still connected with what they do as a business. Tweet B isn't in remit. It's purely, we think of it more as editorial. It's just a humorous image that they've just happened to have shared with their consumers. So The Simpsons, unless they're doing a bet, I suppose, on the outcome of an episode of The Simpsons, it's otherwise not going to be in remit. Okay, and now we're going to take a quick look at search results as well, and one final. Thanks, Melissa. Good question. Tweet A is in remit, but is anything wrong with it? No, not necessarily. Is the answer. Just because something's in remit doesn't mean it's necessarily a problem. It just means it would be covered by the code. So for instance, I don't know, say if a child saw that tweet, it might be a problem. Thanks, thumbs up. Search results. We've got another A or B type of question here. So can anyone tell me if the ASA would regulate A or B or both? Well, if you said just A, you are a winner. So post A is a paid for listing, so we regulate all paid for space. B is just a natural search result. So the code only covers paid results, so where an advertiser has paid to have their product featured or shunted up a list to give them pride of place in the search results. So the rationale is really that these search engines gather material from other websites and republish snippets in a format that the website owners wouldn't necessarily control. So because there's no control element, it's not paid for, we wouldn't cover examples like you see on them in example B there. And then just a final little bit to show other sort of types of media that we don't regulate. Talked a bit about material purely about causes and ideas, unless when they solicit a donation, things like sponsorships and gifts where there's no editorial control. Political advertising, we don't regulate. Whether or not we will do in the future, who knows, but for now we don't. And I'm going to be handing over to David in a bit, who's going to talk about recognition of ads, but we do have time for any questions at this moment.
Perfect. Thanks, Jo. Let's see if we've got any questions. Someone was just asking about the Eddie Stobart example. Was B in remit or not? I believe it wasn't in remit.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, B wasn't. It's just it might have been, for instance, if Paddy Power had a relationship with Sky, who showed The Simpsons, there was a paid for relationship, but just it's just an image, editorial image. So for the purposes of the code, we're saying it's not in remit.
Perfect. Someone else has asked, does SEO, so search engine optimization on Google, not count as payment?
Oh, interesting question. David, can you help me out with that one?
I'm not sure on that. I mean, that would be something we'd have to look into after.
So I suppose really, it's a way of making your websites more easy to discover generally, and I suppose you are paying for that tool, but how it then ends up appearing, it's not necessarily being prioritized on search results. It's your skill that's doing that rather than you paying to have the results up top. So I'm probably erring towards no, but I think we'll definitely follow up on that one.
Yeah, Grace will follow up with you on that one with some more clarity. Someone else has asked, for the examples in this presentation, is there any way to know how the advertisers could make them comply if they don't? So for any of the examples, is there any way to know how they could make it comply if it was a breach of the code?
Yeah. So
sorry, David.
Sorry, Jo. Yeah, I mean, the examples Jo's given it's just a black and white answer, in or out of remit, but we do have more examples, and if they've been upheld as complaints, then we'll explain why. Yeah, when we have those examples, we certainly will.
Perfect. Thank you. Someone else has asked, will the slides be shared afterwards? Yes, we will share a copy of the slides with you and a link to the recording as well, so you can watch the session back. Does anyone else have any other questions about what Jo covered on digital remit? Doesn't look like it. So Dave, we'll hand over to you now. And obviously, if anyone has any other questions that kind of come to mind, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box and we will cover those.
Great, thanks, Jo, for taking us through that. So yeah, the first thing I'm going to talk you through is recognition of ads. Part of the code covers that. So as you can see from this slide, the code states that ads must be obviously identifiable as such. We've always had these rules, but they've come more to the forefront since influencer marketing has taken off in a big way. So it's even more important now for ads to be clear. Beforehand, it would have been a case that McDonald's are promoting McDonald's ads and it would be clearly obvious. But now you have other people advertising people's products, so it becomes a little less clear, and it's gets sandwiched between general editorial content from what the consumers follow. So it just needs to be a bit more of a grey area now. So yeah, it needs to be clear. The code goes on to say that marketing communications must not falsely claim or imply the marketer is acting as a consumer for purposes outside its trade, business, craft, or profession. So bit of a wordy rule there, but if it's not clear from the context of an ad, then it needs to make clear the commercial intent and make it clear from the context. Okay, so who regulates what? So obviously the ASA look at advertising, but there is also the CMA. And so if a brand gives any form of payment or free item to someone who published about the brand, then the CMA will require the publisher to disclose that. It's a legal obligation, and anyone who breaches that requirement can be prosecuted. So out of all communications it applies to, only some will be advertising. So only some will be regulated by the ASA. And Section 2 of the CAP Code does apply to the principles that apply to advertising specifically. But if it's not covered by the ASA, then it might still be an issue under the CMA. So disclosure, ads must be identifiable as ads for some obvious reasons, some not obvious reasons, but it's important for consumers that when they know they're being advertised something or sold to, it needs to be clear that they are being advertised to. It really is important for consumers, and they need to know if the author is commercially motivated. The reason why is to activate critical defenses and avoid being misled. So if someone is talking about how great a product is, then it's important for consumers to know whether they're saying that because they genuinely think that, or if they're being paid for that. But it's also important for advertisers and publishers. It does build trust in business, and that's better for business if there is trust. And I think consumers appreciate, and they are more likely to trust a brand if they feel that that brand is being transparent. So research has told us before that consumers like a prominent brand logo, ideally located at the top of the content, making it clear. Advertisers, consumers like clear labeling, and they also like it to stand out. So use of boxing or colors to make the ad look different from editorial. So if you're looking at a newspaper page, like the example Joe showed earlier with the one in the top right that was the ad, the fact that it's clearly boxed and got the label and it's clear is what consumers like, and that's what researchers has told us previously. So researchers also told us in recognizing ads that it's prominent, so it needs to be obvious that it's advertising as soon as they're looking at it, that it's timely because consumers should know before they engage with the content, and clear. It should be clear that it's advertising. Clear is important, as we've seen examples where an influencer will say they've included a label, but it's either placed behind the profile icon or in font coloring that is in effect means it's not seen, and so it's not obviously identifiable. It needs to be clearly, obviously identifiable. Is it obvious from the context? Do ads normally appear in this space? Does the publisher have an obvious commercial intent, or is it obvious from the posting itself? So ads in ad space, generally accepted that it's obvious from it's going to be an ad. So a social media channel that's brand owned or connected, it's usually going to be clear from the context that it's for that brand. So again, you can see here the example. This is clearly from Brewdog. That's a commercial company, so that's going to be obviously identifiable without being labeled. On many social media platforms, though, posts can be viewed in isolation. If they're retweeted or seen when scrolling through a news feed, it means that it's needs to be obvious as an ad, even when the post is seen on its own. So it just needs to be clear. So in this example, it is clear from the outset that the post is written by the brand rather than by a private individual, and consumers expect a brand to have commercial intent when it's talking about its own products. So the commercial intent of this post is going to be clear from the outset because of the context, and so there's no additional disclosure needed that's in this ad. Okay, so here we have a tweet from AJ Adudu, and this was a case that the ASA investigated back in 2016, so a little while ago, but the principles will still be the same. So if Alpro had sent a free sample of the product to AJ with no strings attached, no further requirements, then and AJ just decided to post about it off her own back, then it wouldn't count as an ad if she's just chosen to do that. As I say, the CMA might be interested in that if she's posting for just receiving it, but it wouldn't be classed as advertising, so it wouldn't be something that we'd become involved in. And that's because it's not in paid for space, and it doesn't fit the advertorial or directly connected definitions that Joe spoke about. So, but as I say, the CMA might still expect her to have some form of disclosure. But as a matter of fact, on this one, the brand did require AJ to include key messages in the tweet. So there was both payment, she received the free items and she got paid, and there's control because they've told her what to include the hashtags in there. Hashtag go on, that was something that she was told that needed to be in there. So there was both payment and control. And so because of that, it did class as an ad under the advertorial definition. And so the cap code would apply to this tweet. And so this means that it needs to be made obviously identifiable as an ad, as we've said. And the ASA noted that it was written in a style similar to her usual tweets. And there was no disclosure to say that it's an ad. So it breached the rules for that, for those reasons that it didn't clearly identify itself as an ad. So that one would need to be labeled. And so as it wasn't, it was a problem. So this case study is an Instagram post on Olivia Buckland's page. Had to click to see all of the text in the caption, and the ASA concludes that it wasn't clear. So when we look at this example, it's worth stressing that the code applies to ads as they are seen by the consumers. And so sometimes just including the label is not going to be sufficient. If information needs to be included in an ad, it should be presented to consumers before what they make what we call is a transactional decision. In the ASA's view, clicking on something is a transactional decision. So if you need to click on a post to see more details, that's a transactional decision. So in this Instagram post, Olivia can be seen holding a pink bottle with the logo CB visible, and it's captioned with "The V-Day prep is well underway. I'm topping up my tan with my favorite Cocoa Brown tan by Marissa Carter, 1 hour tan mousse." Then as it was originally seen, that's where the text ended and it had more after mousse. So that was all the consumer saw before making that transactional decision. Once more was clicked to expand the caption, sorry, you can see the original text, the additional text that then showed original gives me such a natural glow, etc., etc. And then there's some hashtags, including hashtag brand ambassador. And it also included the term brand ambassador in her Instagram bio as well. ASA concluded, however, that it was not clear that the post was a marketing communication before consumers had to make the transactional decision of clicking more, or even after doing so. So this one's a problem because brand ambassador is not a widely acknowledged term by consumers for advertising. So on this one, it was both the placement and the choice of label that was problematic. Because as I say, the placement, because it came after, you had to click more, and the choice of label because it says brand ambassador, which isn't seen as an acceptable term. So that's on the recognition side of things. Do we have any questions on that?
Yeah, we did. We've had a few come through, Dave. So someone has asked, does this apply to paid social, or would it apply to an Instagram grid post, for example?
So, I mean, I'm not a user of Instagram, so I'm not sure what grid post is, but yeah, if it's anything that the influencer, the poster, is paid for, or as Joe said about reciprocal agreement, it doesn't just need to be paid, it can be receiving goods for free, etc. But anything that they post that they've been given or paid for, and the brand has some control over, then it would be classed as advertising. I'm not sure how grid post differs. I don't know if Joe has any information on that, but as far as I know, it would still be classed as a post.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if it's in a format maybe like a grid post, that it would be hard to get the labels, the needed labels on. Maybe it might not even be the right sort of medium, but it's all content that does have that meets the payment test, basically.
Perfect. Thank you. Someone else has asked, what are the rules around journalists disclosing gifted products or services? When do they become influencers?
So again, it's that two-part test. So if journalists are given something to write about, and they're told it needs to be either positive or they need to include certain phrases, etc., then it needs to be classed as advertising. If they're given something to give a genuine, honest review, then there wouldn't be the control part. So it might be something for the CMA, but it wouldn't be classed as advertising if they're carrying out a genuine review on something, because there wouldn't be that control element of the two-part test. So the thing to always remember is there payment or a reciprocal agreement, and is there control? And it needs to be both to fall under our remit. But as I say, there's always the CMA to consider as well, but we wouldn't be able to advise on their requirements. It'd be something for them to. But so yeah, if a journalist is genuinely reviewing something and can write whatever they like and say it's good, bad, or whatever, then it's out. But if they have to say certain things, then it needs to be labeled.
Okay, perfect. Another question here, this is a really interesting one. So what happens if the brand does everything within its power to ensure that an influencer is abiding by the ASA guidelines, but they do not? What is the brand's responsibility? So I guess, like, where's that line get drawn?
Yeah, I mean the ASA does look and hold both parties jointly responsible for what's posted and stuff. So it's really on a brand to think carefully about who they're working with and who they choose to partner with. Obviously, sometimes that can still go rogue, and that might be reflected in any ruling. They might say what the if you see the rulings on the website, it does have the response from the business in there. So if the business has done all they can, they will be able to explain that. But it is really on a brand or advertiser to ensure that who they're working with is gonna follow the rules, and so should be carefully thought about who they choose to partner with.
Perfect, thanks, Dave. Someone else has asked if the post were to be using the official Instagram paid partnership label at the top, would they still need to include #ad?
I don't know. I know our compliance team that Joe works for has been doing a lot with Instagram, so I don't know if Joe's got anything to say about this one.
Yeah, I think we do tend to see paid partnership as being a very helpful indicator that something is an ad. So I think that's something we would definitely take into account. It can sometimes be a bit dependent on the context, but I think because it's kind of a standardized way of alerting people to the fact that there is a paid partnership and it's prominent, I think we generally see that as a very helpful marker. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.
And someone else has asked about particular words for labeling. I'm not going to cover those now because we are going to go through that in quite a lot of detail and hopefully be able to cover some of those questions. Someone else has asked, with the paid partnership indicator at the top of the post, would this also count for gifted posts? I think this is where there is slightly a little bit of confusion.
I think that will that might be something we cover off with the acceptable labels, but we'll just say gifted is going to be something that's going to be a problem if it's genuinely advertising, because gifted makes it sound like there's been payment but no control. So that might be, if it's a genuine something that's genuinely a gift, then that might be something for the CMA, and it might not fall under the advertising codes at all, because gifted makes it sound like there's payment but no control. So yeah, wouldn't fall in our remit at all.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to cover up a couple more of those questions that were asked about labeling. Does anyone else have any other questions regarding disclosure? No? Cool. So let's move on to the next section.
Cool. Thanks, Ramneek. Thanks, Joe. So yeah, now we're going to look at labeling of ads. So as Ramneek said, that's why we're not answering some of the questions, because we're going to look at that in more detail now. So if it's not otherwise clear, the easiest way to make it clear is to include a label. And as I said before, it needs to be up front. Audience must not find out after they've already engaged with the ads. And only ads needs to make clear that they're ads. So you do need to bear in mind the limitations of the platform devices. So as we've already seen with Instagram, it's not acceptable to put it after you have to click more. So when including a label, where it's placed is also key, as well as what's said, and so how much is visible, and you need to adapt the approach accordingly. But as it says there, the main thing to remember is that you need to make it obvious. So if in doubt, it's always best to include the label, but it's only for something that's genuinely an ad. And so the thing I will reiterate is the payment and control needs to be there for it to be classed as an ad. So here we had another example, and this was a video post from an Instagram account of Millie Mackintosh, and first showed this image followed by a video that included a scene with the text J2O Spritz, hashtag blend recommends. And it had on there hashtag SP amongst other captions. So the ASA considered the branded shot contributed to the ad being identifiable as an ad, but that it was nevertheless not sufficient to ensure that it was obvious, because it appeared at the end of the video. So as I said, it needs to be before consumers engage. Having something at the end of a video, having someone watch a 2-minute video, then say at the end, that was an ad, is not going to be good enough. But the ASA also considered that the SP, hashtag SP, which is shorthand for sponsored posts, was unlikely to be understood by consumers. And so it's not a sufficiently accurate label, as they considered sponsored posts to be distinct from those over an advertiser. Brand had editorial control. So again, sponsored posts that we do see maybe something that needs to be labeled, but it's not sufficient to call an ad a sponsored ad, because it has different understanding and definitions. So with this one, there's issues with both the choice of label and also with its placement as well. So this one, same problem applied here. There is a label on it, but the label saying that affiliate was put in a place where consumers could easily miss it. As you can probably see from looking at it yourself, it's right down there in the bottom right of the post. So it's obscured by other icons from the platform. It's in a smaller text, it's in a color that's not really stand out. So on this one, yep, there's a label, but the label was considered that it wasn't clear enough. And though marketers and influencers might be very familiar with affiliate schemes and how they work, the ASA considers that this isn't a term that would be widely understood to mean that the post was an ad. It's not clear to the average consumer is what we look at when we look at the ASA look at complaints, and the average consumer is unlikely to understand what is meant by affiliate. So both what's said and where it is a problem. So another case study here, and this one is a case where it wasn't clear from the context that it was an ad. It's an ad for War Paint Cosmetics, but it's not posted by the brand's own Instagram account. It's been posted by an influencer who was a brand ambassador and contractually obliged to promote the brand in a positive light on their own social media. All of the posts about the brand would therefore count as ads under the advertorial definition, because there's both payment and control. So the control element is does vary a lot. It can be something as simple as it says there, having to promote the brand in positive light at all times. That would class as control, even if they have no other control over what the influencer says. The fact that it needs to be positive would be enough for it to be classed as control. So the editorial control is there on this one, and so was the payment. But because it's not on the brand's own social media, because it's coming from an influencer, the context in which it's being put out there isn't obvious to consumers. And so for that reason, the contents of the post would need to make it explicitly clear that it's an ad. And in this case, it wasn't clear enough. The bio of the influencer did state that they were a brand ambassador for W7 Cosmetics, but the bio isn't displayed alongside the post. So having just something on the bio isn't going to be sufficient because of how social media works. You don't always look at the bio when you're looking at a post. So rather than having to go out their way to visit an influencer's own page and reading the bio each time, people aren't going to do that. And the code applies to the individual ads. So it's the context in which an ad is seen. And so it's entirely possible for a consumer to just see the ad without going through the bio. So just having something in the bio itself, even if it was a sufficient label, isn't going to be sufficient to cover the individual ads, because not everyone will see the original bio. So a label would need to be in the ad itself, and that's often the easiest way to do it. So here we have another case study. This one's for Hewlett Packard, and most of this video, Sakona Jolie's do loads of videos, and they have a lot of editorial content, and most of this video was unrelated editorial. But what they did do is they used an on-screen ad label and explained verbally when it came to the point in the video where the ad was. So they couldn't put a label to cover the whole video because the whole video isn't an ad, and so putting the label on the ad when it becomes an ad is clear enough. So this one was something the ASA looked at, but they took no further action and decided this was okay because it was the content clearly was stated as an ad. Okay, so where should the label go? Commercial intent should be made clear prior to engagement. Consumers should not have to interact with the content first. So the key is that consumers should know right from the outset, before they engage, that it's an advertorial. Labels placed at the end of an article halfway through a video, unless it's only that part of the video that is the ad, and in a text description that needs the viewer to open it up more, are all likely to be insufficient. When it's the whole article, post or video that's an ad, it's got to be made clear at the outset. As I said, this means if you're choosing a video from a list on YouTube, it should be clear before the consumer opens the page and watches the video that it is an ad. So it's got to be clear right from the outset if the whole thing is an ad. If only part of the content is an ad, though, it is slightly different. It just needs to be made clear at the point the section starts. So if it's product placement, it should be flagged up when the product first appears. So in that last example I showed you, you saw that when it got to that certain part of the video, it says ad, and as you can be seen on the example for Zoella here, it's part of a video and it comes up as ad when it is an ad. So we are doing some work in this area. It's things that can constantly change. If things do change, then it'll be updated on our website. But at the moment, as I say, whole content ads need to be visible from the start. Partial content needs to be visible when the content starts. Okay, so Neither the CMA nor the ASA is prescriptive about how disclosures work and should be made. And there might be more than one correct way to do it in many cases, especially as social platforms continue to evolve, such as Instagram putting paid partnership up. Things like that are becoming more common as the platforms change. So things may change as we go along and as consumer knowledge becomes more advanced. But at the moment, the ASA has done research project on consumer understanding of different labels, and the results made a good argument for using ad label at the beginning of ads as the minimum requirement. That's consumers' best understanding of what actually is an ad. So the aim should be to not have try and find loopholes or try and find other ways around it. It needs to be obvious to obviously identifiable to consumers, and so doing that research we can see that what they understand, and so that's what makes it obvious for them. So as you can see there, the always okay is the ad, hashtag ad, advertisement, advertising feature, or advert. Consumers will always understand that to be an ad. Sometimes acceptable is paid promotion, because the platforms are now using that, and the brand ambassador is becoming something that's on the platforms as well, and consumer understanding is becoming better there. But again, as we said, it needs to be on the post, not just on the bio. You're getting into the risky stage with sponsored and gifted, hashtag gifted affiliate. The first three there, sponsored, gifted, and hashtag gifted, are probably a risk because they don't fully explain the position. That's more when there's just payment and not control, so it wouldn't be an ad, so they're actually misleading, whereas affiliate is just consumer understanding is likely to not understand it. So there's a big risk there. And as you can see, the other one's rarely acceptable. Again, it's because it's either going to be not ad the term sponsored isn't an advert, it's different, or it's consumer understanding. I'm not going to understand what hashtag AF or hashtag AF is going to mean, so they're best avoided. But the ones to always use are the advertisement, for the reasons that's been stated. So we've come up with a guide. It's called the Influencers Guide. It's really worth checking out. It goes into more detail and covers everything that I've covered there. It's called an Influencers Guide, but even if you're not an influencer, it's still good, and the same principles apply. Reason it's called the Influencers Guide is we've done a lot of work with influencers. We were seeing a lot of non-compliance in that area, and it was an evolving field, so we've done a lot of work, and the CMA also contributed to it. And so the Influencers Guide is really useful, and it's on our website. As you can see, it includes a flowchart that influencers or brands can use to work out if what they're making counts as an ad and so needs to be labeled. It's really a straightforward flowchart, probably more straightforward than it actually looks in that little shot there, so well worth looking at. Okay, so enhanced disclosures. So everything we've spoken about is as I said, is aimed at the average consumer. But if there's any media or advertising that's going to feature somewhere where the younger children under 12 are going to see it, then the disclosure needs to be enhanced to make it even more obvious, because younger children aren't going to have the same assessment skills needed to identify certain types of online ads. So significantly integrated, highly immersive ads directed at under 12s, and the context isn't clear, going to need this enhanced disclosure. For example, anything beyond the general level of disclosure required by general audiences. A vlogger, for example, might introduce a paid endorsement piece directed at under 12s. They'd need to explain that they have been incentivized to produce the content my particular marketer, and making it really clear. So as it says, they're sufficient to identify marketer and commercial intent. So a clear statement needs to be included, unless logos, etc., make it clear. So again, the same rules apply, but it just needs to be even more obvious when dealing with under 12s. That brings the end of the labelling section. Happy to answer any questions about what we've covered there.
Sorry, if anyone has any questions, do pop them into the Q&A box and we will cover that now before we move on to the next section. I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes if they do have any questions about that. So someone has asked, if they were, as an organisation, were to gift someone a product, but there was no obligation to post or control over what they were saying, would they need to mark the post as #gifted?
That one, it would need to be labelled. Whether the label would be sufficient or not is not for us to say, unfortunately, because it wouldn't be classed as an ad, because there is no there's no control over what needs to be said. It's something that the CMA would be interested in, but it wouldn't be classed as an advert, so it wouldn't need the #ad. But whether the #gifted would be sufficient is something for the CMA to answer rather than ourselves, because it's not an ad.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Does anyone else have any other questions? Like Dave mentioned, there's a lot more information about exactly what we cover and what the CMA cover in the influencers guide as well. So in the follow-up email I send around, I'll be sure to include that so you can have a look there too. Someone said, as a brand, if a supplier pays for an ad on your social media pages, should you need to add any hashtags if there is no control?
So if there's no control, it wouldn't need hashtags. If it's coming from a brand, and even if there was control, if it's coming from a supplier, it may be obvious from the context. So I'm thinking if Tesco have something from Heinz and they post it, it's probably going to be obvious that it's an ad, because Tesco's sell Heinz. Everyone knows Heinz is a brand. So even if there is payment and control, there might not need hashtags or labels anyway, because it will probably be obviously identifiable. But I hope that covers the question. That's the best example I can think of for that.
Yeah, hopefully that covers that. Yeah, they've said yes, it does. And I will share some details at the end about how you can get in touch with Copy Advice, who are the team that Dave works on. So if there are any sort of very specific examples of campaigns that you're thinking of running and you're kind of thinking, we're not actually sure whether this needs any hashtags or any disclosure, then you can get in touch with the Copy Advice team. And it obviously makes it a lot easier when the team can see the ad, you know, and actually, you know, see the context of it, be able to give you a bit of a clearer answer on that. Does anyone have any other questions about labeling? I don't think so. So Jo, shall we move on to targeting?
Yes, that's great. And obviously there are other brands of baked beans available. David's has no relations with Heinz, thank goodness. Yeah, so it's going to have a quick look at targeting ads on social media, and this is really in the context of ads for products that have got age restrictions. So it's 18 plus for alcohol, electronic cigarettes and gambling, and 16 plus for lotteries and food and soft drinks that are HFSS, so they're high in fat, salt or sugar. Some of my favourite foods to eat, especially at Christmas. Because they're age restricted, obviously that means that they can't be placed in mediums that are directed at children, or young teens who are underage. So you can't email ads directly to someone who is going to be obviously underage, and indeed if a child is signed into Facebook, YouTube, whatever, and receives an ad for any of these products, then it will almost certainly be a breach, because it's they're signed in as a child, and it should be clear that they're a child, so ads should be directed away from them. If you're placing an ad in a paid for space on a platform or website, and you can't individually select who receives the ads, then you need to be thinking about using whatever demographic data is available to you to ensure that you're minimizing the exposure of children to those ads. So it's typically should have an audience of children under 25% and as low as possible, to make sure you're limiting children's exposure to restricted ads. There are not necessarily age restricted products, but for ads that have got particular content that you wouldn't want children to see, for instance, it's violent or distressing, or sexual content, for instance, that should also not be placed in media targeted at children. There's not quite as strict a 25% rule in that case, but we'd always make a judgment call on whether the platform was an appropriate place to put an ad of that nature that children might see it. And we also need to have a think about interest-based targeting, and this we know from research that kids lie about their age on social media, and whilst sometimes it can feel harsh that it's not necessarily your responsibility that a child has lied about their age on social media, we still want people to think about whether or not an ad could potentially be seen by a child, even if they're signed in faking their ages and they appear to be, their presence online appears to be over 18. So we want people to think about other ways of really strengthening the way you prevent an ad, a child being exposed to an inappropriate ad. And we have recently announced a new revised position on interest-based targeting. So a child who misrepresents their age is still very likely to remain interested in content that's designed for them. So, and they're less likely to be interacting with content that is designed for adults. So you can really try and make sure you think about the profile and try and avoid things that would appeal to children. So make sure you're selecting I don't know, renting a house or mortgages, which a lot of adults aren't even interested in, and make sure you deselect interests that are going to attract kids to really create that division for them. I would not be very good at thinking up examples, but can you guys think of any examples that might exclude children?
Yeah, feel free to pop them into the chat box, and we can go through some of those. It's good to get our thinking caps on and think of some.
If you can.
If anyone has any ideas. Someone's put cartoon, so this would obviously be something that you would select if you wanted it to appear in front of children, but not necessarily something.
Oh yeah, so what would? Yeah, great. Working environment type of ad, home ownership. Good. Alcohol might interest some children. Yeah, mortgages, perfect. I think care homes, I've got is something that is certainly more of interest to the grown-ups. Insurance, perfect. Yeah, all things that kids aren't naturally necessarily going to be interested in.
Hashtag boomers only.
Boomers only, yeah.
That's a really good one.
That's excellent, Melissa. Great. Right, let's have a look at, so we've got a couple of examples of how advertisers have got this just right. I might just do one example because I'm conscious of time here. So we've got Diageo Great Britain, good old Captain Morgan, and there's a promoted tweet here, and it states, when your student loan hits your bank account, like if you're celebrating, hashtag freshers, hashtag like a captain, and it's got the pirate there, fist pump in the air. And we had a complainant challenge whether the ad was inappropriately targeted at people under 18. So the ASA considered the medium, and I thought because the majority of Twitter users are over 18, the ad probably was placed in an appropriate medium. But despite this, there was no guarantee that someone under the age of 18 would be prevented from seeing the ad. Not least because some young users can misreport their age on social media. However, Captain Morgan had separately used Twitter's follower targeting functionality. So the tweet was served to Twitter users who were identified by Twitter as having as also being followers of the website Unilad, and the ASA understood that website had an audience of whom 99% or something were over the age of 18. So therefore, the ASA considered that those identified as similar to followers of Unilad were also likely to be aged 18 or over. And because Twitter was a medium primarily used by those aged over 18, and Captain Morgan had done all sorts of other things to help with the targeting of it, the ASA concluded that the ad had not been directed at those under 18 and the complaint was not upheld. So they'd put a few things in place there to make sure, to the best of their abilities, that only the right age group were going to see those ads. Quickly show, this is another similar one basically with Zoe Sugg, Zoella, and also Alfie Days of Pointless blog. Very similar situation in that they covered all of their bases. It's now for Nutella, so it's a HFSS product, and they've put into place various different things to ensure that the ad only went to an audience consisting of over 16s. So solutions: in the event of a complaint, the ASA is always going to expect some evidence to show you've done everything you can to minimise the risk of a child viewing that ad. So we've talked about using interest-based targeting, so selecting and deselecting interests, which help minimise the risk, ensuring that ads that aren't suitable for children aren't served directly to children's social media accounts, and really making sure you're doing everything you can to minimise children's exposure to ads they shouldn't be seeing. And I think that's it from me. Unless Romney would like.
No, perfect. Thanks, Jo.
Oh, sorry, Romney.
No worries. Thank you so much. So on this slide, you can see there's a few key takeaways, just highlighting exactly what we have spoken about today. But we've got some time now to take any questions that you might have on any of the content that Jo and Dave have covered today. So now's your chance to get your questions in, and Jo and Dave will be able to cover those for you. Does anyone have any questions? Someone said if they have any specific questions, who is best to contact? Okay, so let me take you through some of these final slides just to give you some more information about who to contact and who to speak to if you need any more guidance. We do have an e-learning platform. So this consists of online modules that you can sort of take in your own time. You have access to them for 6 months, and they're a really good way to train up large numbers of your teams. So we've got someone there on social media, misleading advertising, and then also specific topics like alcohol and HFSS products and motoring and things like that. So if you'd like any more information about our e-learning modules, get in touch with me and I'll be able to help you out with that. In terms of other resources and guidance, we are on Twitter and we share all of our weekly rulings on there, and any new guidance that we release also gets shared on there. We've got our insight newsletters, which are really helpful. They're put together by the Copy Advice team, and they contain any new sort of advice articles that we put together about relevant topics. So it's worth going onto our website and signing up to those newsletters. We also have our training newsletters as well. So if you're keen to find out about other training that we run, so our Advice AMs or our CAP webinars, then it's worth signing up to those as well. We do run regular training seminars like the one we have done today. This is our last training session of the year, but we will be releasing our 2022 training calendar very soon, so keep an eye on our website for that. We do run bespoke presentations, so if there's anything that you've heard today that you think as an organisation it would be helpful for us to come in and really tailor a session to the work that you do and your organisation, then get in touch with us and we can definitely do that. And probably most importantly, and the team you should be going to if you have any specific questions are our copy advice team. So they are there to provide you with any guidance on non-broadcast campaigns that you might be running, and it is a free service for 24-hour turnaround. So in my follow-up email, I will include information on how you can get in touch with our copy advice team. I'll give you their number and link to the website on how you can submit a request if you have one. And it's also worth checking out our website because we've got a huge resource library in there, loads of really great content. And following on from Joe's section on targeting, we actually did a really good webinar last week that focused specifically on online targeting of ads to under 25, so age restricted ads. So it's worth checking that out, and I'll include a link to the recording of that as well if you're interested to find out more about that topic. Does anyone else have any other questions about what we have covered today, or where they can find more help or guidance? Happy to take them now because we've got a little bit of time left.
And also, I was just thinking as well, whilst people are thinking about that, we did have that earlier question about fixing some of the examples that we've seen or on this presentation, and I don't necessarily have to flip back through them, Rumley, but yeah, in simple terms, one of the earlier ones, it turned out it can be as simple to fix as adding a label. So maybe someone didn't realise something was going to be within our remit, then they do.
Oh, Joe, I think.
But another aspect to think about is if you've got content that you didn't think was.
Well, I think we're losing Joe a bit.
You didn't think it was advertising, but it turned out it was. Oh no, sorry.
No, I think you're back now. I think you're just a bit frozen on the screen. We can hear you.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. It was in remit, then it's going to be subject to the rest of the code as well. So you want to be thinking about whether you're making claims that then you would have had to have held evidence for, and that sort of thing. So it can be a big impact sometimes if you're having to deal with a piece of content that you didn't really consider was advertising.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Joe. All of our training is CPD accredited, so if you would like a CPD certificate, then please do drop us an email at events@asa.org.uk and I can get that arranged for you. Once we close off the webinar today, a feedback form will pop up on your screen. It should only take about 2 minutes of your time, and we'd really appreciate any feedback you have on today's training. And you'll have the chance in there as well to give us any suggestions for training that you would like to see as well, which would be very helpful for us next year. So I'd love to get all of those suggestions in if there are any topics that you'd like us to focus on next year for training as well. I don't think we have any other questions. So I think we'll leave things here, but should anyone have any other comments or questions from today's training, then feel free to get in touch with us at events@asa.org.uk, and we'll be happy to answer any of those as well. And we will get back to the person who asked the question about SEO. We'll get an answer to you on that as well.
Will do.
Great. Thanks,
That's
Joe.
great.
Dave.
Thanks, everyone. Apologies for my slight technical difficulty there, and have a great rest of the day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.